Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jaya Karem, and I will be the moderator for this breakout room.
Great.
Before we begin, I would just like to take a minute to go over some ground rules to ensure all our presenters and guests have a positive and educational experience. We ask that anyone who is not presenting to keep their mics off during the presentations. This will help eliminate any background noise or any distractions. If you have a question or a comment, please type in the chat so we can go through them at the end of the session during the question and answer session. Presentations need to also stay within their allotted 15 minutes. When the time is up, I will ask the presenters to wrap up their points so we can move on to the next presentation. Like this will ensure all our colleagues have the time to share their research. Lastly, we would like to remind everyone that this session is being recorded. Thank you so much, and I'll now pass on it to our first presentation.
All right. So, hi guys. My name is Carissa Moss-Manucha. I'm from Concordia University. And just because I was a little nervous, I have a lot of information to present. I actually did record mine. And so I'm going to go ahead and play that for you guys. And I'd be happy to take questions or comments, obviously, at the end after all the presentations are over. But just know that there's a lot of information. So that's why I chose to do it this way, because I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to respect that 15 minutes. So give me just a second. I'll go ahead and get started here. Let's see here, share. And if you guys can just let me know as soon as it starts, if you can hear the sound okay, that would be fantastic. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Do you guys see my presentation?
Yes, yeah. We do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start it and just tell me if the sound is okay or not. Hi there, my name is Carissa Moss-Manucha. Could you hear it?
Yes.
Okay. Let me just make it a little bit louder. Okay, so here we go. And my presentation is Unintended Plagiarism Amongst International Students in Western Universities. I would just like to tell you ahead of time that I do have quite a bit of information to cover, so I'll be talking a little bit faster than I normally would. But at the end of the presentation, I will present my contact information. So if you'd like to get a hold of this recording or you have any questions after the symposium gets over, feel free to contact me at that address that I will share at the end of the presentation. Let me just start with a little bit of my background and what led me to the topic in the first place. So I'm a high school classroom teacher, and this spring I was actually going through a lesson with my students that was centered on academic integrity. And that got me thinking about academic integrity, not just in K-12, which is where I was seeing it, but also in higher education in general. And I wondered how big these problems were of dishonesty and plagiarism in higher educational institutions. And that led me to thinking about international and diverse student body that now is really growing, not just in Canada, in the US, but across the world. And then I thought, I wonder if there's any difference in the reported rates of plagiarism and academic dishonesty amongst international students versus domestic students. And of course, that led me to researching countless peer-reviewed articles that talked about this very issue. So that's a little bit of what got me interested in this topic in the first place. So let's go ahead and dig right in. Our learning objectives are going to be twofold. Number one is, what are the causes for this trend? And number two is, what should the response be by institutions and professors as a result of the data, and how can we lessen these cases of plagiarism? Just as a little disclaimer, obviously we know that both international and domestic students have been disciplined for dishonest academic behavior, but I'm going to focus on just international students and second language students specifically. However, just know that all the implications and takeaways can help all students. All right, so the difference between unintended and just straight up plagiarism, I think, is just the intention behind it. So unintended is done without the intention to do anything wrong. Learners may not even know that they are plagiarizing. On the other hand, just plagiarism in general implies that the learner knows what they are doing is not acceptable, but they still choose to do it. Almost like a deceitfulness. They're trying to deceive through doing something they know is wrong. So there's an increase of diverse student populations in Western colleges and universities in both the face-to-face programs as well as online programs, and that's been dramatically increasing over the past, I would say, 2 decades from what I understand from the data. And it makes sense, right? With the ease of connectivity, many international students today are taking advantage of being able to attend university in other countries while still residing in their home country. So many online university programs have seen an increase in international students with the wider access of the internet that's now easily available in most places around the world. At the same time, plagiarism and other academic dishonest behaviors on college campuses have also increased. There's a growing body of research that supports these findings. Some studies have proposed that for all the good that the communication medium of online classes, both synchronous and asynchronous e-learning courses, have brought, one thing on the rise is an increase in students being disciplined for dishonest behaviors. Some have proposed it's due to the ease in which academic cheating can be achieved with the computer, the tablet, or the mobile device. And some point out that, there's not really deterrence to stop it online. So for example, in a traditional face-to-face class, you have to clear your desk for a test. Professor is monitoring the room the entire time. Where online, it's still quite new to a lot of professors, and there are some things that are helping this, but they're still maybe not in the same ballpark as face-to-face. There's not as many deterrents. And so that's what some people have said. But regardless, we do know that the number of cases has gone up. And there's a growing number of studies that have connected international students with higher rates of plagiarism than domestic students. Here's one example of that, and this is taken from Wall Street Journal. It is showing just results for the USA. I think, though, however, we can apply this to other countries based on the growing body of data available that seems to support the findings here. Obviously, this chart does lead to some unanswered questions. Due to the time and the limit, I can't really answer that here. What's defined as cheating, how students were classified, where they were from, things like that. But the general data shows just that the US alone, the number of academic dishonesty cases were higher among international students than domestic students during this time period. Okay, so then the question becomes, well, why? Why is this? So I looked at about 20 or so research studies for this topic, and the same themes seem to be evident throughout for the general causes of why this group of students might be at a higher risk for unintentional plagiarism than other groups of students. So obviously it's a complex problem that differs from person to person based on a lot of different factors that one must consider, but there are some, like I said, some themes that seem to be quite consistent throughout the studies. And the first one is new culture stresses. So for example, international students who are living in another country, learning to drive a car, public transportation, making friends, learning their way around, maybe figuring out differences in the money or cultural traditions or language differences. Maybe it's immigration concerns, figuring out how to get their visas or whatever else that they need. Maybe it's healthcare. It could be financial concerns. They might have to get a job, and that adds to the burden onto their shoulders of having a job, figuring out the new culture, and having to go to school. So all of these puts stresses on someone who's coming into a new culture as an international student who's moving to another place. Now, even for the international students who are just taking online classes from a Western university, just adjusting to academic norms can be very challenging. So they have to get used to a different style of teaching, a different grading system, perhaps, cultural norms, both inside and outside of the classroom, with regards to how to communicate with peers and teachers. All of that are things that they will have to adjust to, which can lead, without them realizing, into plagiarism. The biggest thing I found was academic differences. So many enter Western universities without knowledge of copyright issues, importance of ownership, authorship, research searching skills, and what proper citations even are. Cultural differences in the schooling system. So for example, in some Asian countries, such as India or China, there's more rote memorization. In fact, I read that some of the subjects in the studies would sometimes, they would relate these stories of how they would get better marks. if they memorize things exactly word for word, which kind of seems a little like, wow, from someone who's coming from a completely different background. But again, it's just what is the norms, and those might be different depending on where you're coming from. So cultural differences and maybe viewing sources. So some students' backgrounds would encourage them to not change any words to a source. That person who wrote it is the expert, and to change it would be considered kind of disrespectful. So Western students at the same time, though, are taught to not use the exact words of a source unless you're quoting them verbatim with quotes and you're giving credit to them in a piece of work. So again, there's some differences there. Let's see. One source actually used this example of a post-grad student doing research and needing to translate ideas from one language into another without knowing some of the technical words. And if you think about it, this can be really challenging for second or third language learners. I mean, some students could end up borrowing words from foreign sources without realizing that maybe what they're doing is actually plagiarizing. And that's how it can turn into something that they never intended in the first place, but it's due to the poor language skills, the underdeveloped skills in their second or third or perhaps even fourth language. So let's just sum this up real quick. The 4 main takeaways of what are some of the causes that would put international students at risk. And again, you can apply this to maybe new immigrants, multilingual, multicultural background students, but all these would be at a higher risk for unintended plagiarism. So what is the solution? After identifying the most common reasons for what puts the student group at a higher risk for dishonest academic behaviors, such as unintended plagiarism, we're now left with the what now question. So how do instructors of these students help them so those who aren't meaning to do anything wrong end up not being disciplined? And how can Western universities help lessen the causes of unintended plagiarism amongst their students, especially international students, in a supportive and meaningful way? Well, let's go ahead and start with instructors. So what can instructors do? And then we'll go ahead and go on to institutions. So from the source that's listed there, it basically said something very interesting. It said that there were cases of possible unintended plagiarism are addressed differently from instructor to instructor. Some instructors take it as a chance to help the student realize the difference between acceptable and unacceptable academic work, but others may not want to take the time and be bothered, so they just follow seemingly rigid procedures without any personal approach. Sometimes they put it even back on the students to correct the mistakes. So notice that there's a difference in mindset. One is discipline and one is opportunity. But it seems like from all the research that I've studied that when professors take it as an opportunity to really show that student what is and what is not acceptable, that's when the student really learns, because again, they're not wanting to do this. They don't even know what they're doing sometimes is wrong. And so someone has to teach them. So punishment without seeking to understand or personally connect to students can actually leave them feeling frustrated, isolated, and stressed. And of course, that's not what we want for the international students that we have in Western universities. Clearly expressing expectations can help students become aware of academic norms in Western universities. Then they can start adjusting on their own instead of this awareness coming from being disciplined. So for example, providing poor and excellent writing samples can help demonstrate what an instructor is looking for. So you're more likely to get what you're expecting when you share a taste of what it looks like. Ask any teacher. The more specific you are in what you're looking for, the more specific you're going to have results. So many of these students actually come from schooling norms that are very clear and rigid in what's expected, and they have a really hard time adjusting to the free-for-all creative approach that's often taken in Western universities, which is something that, instructors can really keep in mind. All right, so what can institutions do to help support international students? There's a couple things there up on the screen. One is there, free support groups. That would really encourage these students who find it intimidating to approach their professor to receive help on assignments and writing tasks, perhaps from peers instead, so it's a little bit less intimidating. Another thing is international groups maybe forming support networks where many students can kind of fit in and join in and meet other people. And a lot of studies that I looked at found this really, really important in adjusting to a new culture and feeling more connected for these students, and that actually lowered their risk of plagiarism. Another thing is workshops held for international students on plagiarism or on teaching writing skills has been found to be very, very, very helpful. One study at the University of Albany, from the source that's listed there, actually focused on, it was a study that was focused on holding workshops for international students on plagiarism and research process. They tested students before and after, and they actually found there was a significant improvement in both of those areas just by attending the workshops, not doing anything else, just attending them. And even better was that when they went back several months later, they found that these students were continuing to use and apply the skills that they had learned in these workshops. So taking this a little bit further, my own university just announced that through the University of Saskatchewan, there was actually going to be a series of free online workshops focused on academic writing tutorials for international ESL graduate students this summer. So this is the type of thing that's going to make a really big difference in this area over time. So in summary, let's go ahead and go over a few of these. Obviously, we must start somewhere. Policies will differ from place to place, but starting with thinking about how to prevent and support is the first step to helping support international students, whether online or in person. Obviously, every student's struggles and reasons for unintentional plagiarism may be different, and we should seek to understand the individual before doling out punishment. The focus on teaching and learning should be obviously above all else. Learning to look at the issue differently from punishment to understanding can change the whole conversation and feel of the issue. And it's all about relationships with students. So changing the way instructors approach the subject can give that personal touch that students who are struggling need to see and connect with when they're uncertain in their academic work. They become less defensive, isolated, upset, frustrated, and stressed. And lastly, workshops, mandatory trainings, and in-class examples of acceptable and non-acceptable work go a long way in helping students become aware of expectations. Here's my contact information if you would like to connect with me over anything that I've said. And I look forward to taking any questions that you may have in just a few minutes.
Thank you so much for sharing all the useful information with us. We'll have a question and answer session at the end of everyone's presentation. So now I hand over this time to Jan, Saida, Hussein, and Mariam from the Memorial University, Canada.
Thank you, Jaya. And Hussein's just going to post our presentation there. While he's bringing that up, I bring greetings. Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me, Jaya?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Great. I bring greetings from St. John's, Newfoundland, and I am speaking from the traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq and the ancestral homeland of the Beothuk. I also bring greetings and acknowledge the contributions of the Innu and the Inuit of the big land, the great land, as we call Labrador. I feel very humbled to be here today, and I mean that honestly, in the presence of 3 graduate students who jumped at the opportunity to co-present. I'm now going to call on each of them to say hello in their birth language. So Sayeda, hello.
Thank you, Jan. Hushamadid. This is Sayeda.
And Hussein, who's our master of the internet today.
Salaam alaikum, I'm Hussein.
And Khetere, who is way over in Iran.
سلام روزتون بخیر باشه. اسم من خاطر است. خاطر من.
Wonderful. And we felt that was an important part of our presentation. I'm now going to turn it over to Sayeda, and she's going to lead us onward.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I hope you all are staying safe during this pandemic. I want to thank my university and my professor, Dr. Jan Bewley, for this incredible opportunity. So it was December 2020, my last registration for my final course in the graduate program. I was already overwhelmed, not because I had to shift from internship route to course route due to pandemic, but because I was just overthinking what kind of coursework it would be and what mode of classes it would be. So since pandemic did not allow me to have more options for on-campus or remote classes, I really wanted to attend my final course virtually and feel the actual sense of graduate classes in an international university. Finally, it was revealed that my registered course 6693 Ed will be delivered remotely. And upon receiving the first email from my professor, Dr. Jan Bullion, to attend the introductory section for the course, which was way before the actual classes start date, I was so excited because this was the first time I have experienced introducing myself in front of the whole class. It cultivated in me the sense that I really belong here into the world of education and educators. It was through this course I was able to lens the world of education more profoundly. So regardless of whether the instruction is synchronous or asynchronous, learning is questionable without a motivated instructor and an engaged student. Positive productive learning environments are key to students' emotional, social, and academic success. But unfortunately, it does not happen on its own. Positive learning communities must be created. There are many elements that goes into making such a positive learning community, such as providing a safe learning space where risk-taking is encouraged, trust and respect towards each other are fostered. There is an open, authentic conversation and where a positive interaction is the only key. Also, lack of online experience may promote fear, leading to the ability, doubts, and uncertainty concerning how to be an effective online teacher or student. So these doubts can cause withdrawal of resistance or to participation. Research says that one solution to sustain motivation is not to lose the personal connection that already exists between teachers and students. Similarly, have we determined the effective and positive strategies of teaching and learning to maintain the well-being of our students during online education? Humans are social beings, and the nature of one's social life is one of the most important influence on their mental and physical health. According to a group of researchers, online social connectedness has only been associated with lower depression and anxiety, greater satisfaction with life, and sense of belongingness. Social connections feed the need of community and belongingness. Student engagement is a concept often discussed in education and is something instructors want to see and feel in the classrooms. Generally, student engagement tends to be viewed as the level of interest students show towards the topics being taught, their interaction with the content, instructor, and peers, and their motivation to learn and progress through the course. Students may become disconnected if they feel isolated or if they do not feel validated during their interaction in the classroom. Hence, it is important to build a community in an online course and provide opportunities for diverse learners' interaction and make students realize the key importance of being socially connected through online classroom communities. Further talking about classroom communities, celebrating cultural differences cannot be avoided. Laramande and Lendhart in 2006 state that during online instruction, it is especially important to avoid disassociation from the existing classroom culture. In an online community, educators are the hope which keeps the people like me going. Amira Al-Ghawabi rightly says that true diversity remains elusive and that no one should be treated differently, irrespective of their caste, color, creed, gender, sexual orientation, and what they wear to cover their head. Education online or on campus must be about sharing the true knowledge and understanding of history and present of diverse cultures. And curriculum should reflect the vast diversity of the students. So together we can make a positive change in the society if we push back our unknown biases and cultivate among our students the sense of belongingness and respect toward diverse cultures. Diversity is not a choice. In fact, it is the reality of human existence. It is the oxygen for humanity. Helping our students understand diverse cultural existence will develop in them a sense of respectful understanding towards these differences and help building a positive relation with everyone. So, have we done enough in making these concerns addressed? Thank you everyone for your time. Over to you, Hussein.
Thank you. I'm just having my timer on. So far we have realized that there's a huge number of students that would be willing to come to developed countries to study, and they are known as international students. Those international students are basically different because they come from very different parts of the world. And their educational style, their educational system has always been different. The very first thing that we need to know as instructors is to know that we probably do not have adequate information about the whole world educational system to be able to judge about many different things, or we probably don't know that many of those educational systems are shaped around people's belief, people's history, culture, and value systems. That these value systems are specific to any geographical vicinity that has been helping people to survive, to live, and to thrive in lives. Now, in the international context, which there is one dominant culture, I would say, we have to help them to speak up about who they are and show us the value and the appreciation that we need to know about. We instructors need to have a broad knowledge of these differences to be able to address and treat all students in a fair manner. This could be part of our work of restorative justice in the classroom. We need to give everybody an opportunity to be fully present as they are and talk about their identity, their values, and their culture so that they could start helping others. And if we don't have enough information about the world's diversity, we may fail doing this. Interaction is a basic part of our educational system. Respect is another part. We need to have respectful interactions. But is a show of respect is enough? Probably not. Respectful interaction is not always a show of respect. It could be recognition. Recognition of every individual is vital because they need to know that they are validated. Students need to feel appreciated when their identity is acknowledged, welcomed, and even would be used as a learning experience. Respect could be only well established if there is a deep understanding and validation of all students in the classroom. Students will start learning from one another as well. Students learn to appreciate one another, and this would be a great learning experience. Another problem is language barrier. The person who's speaking English as a second language in our classes as international students has been going a long way, spending probably years and tried very hard to be the best today. And they are doing their best even if they are not perfect. So let's appreciate that. Let's be part of that help. To respect one another, I think we need to be tolerant and we need to be willing to learn from one another. Every culture in this world is a piece of treasure that we all need to learn about in our classrooms. Emotional support is important as well, because if students feel isolated, if they feel lonely in the classroom, they would not be able to present themselves. They would not be able to exhibit their skills, talents that we need them in the classroom. We need a classroom full of bright students who interact with all their skills, with their ideas, their genuine ideas, their critical thinking. If students are not validated, By validation, I mean that we need to know about them. We need to know about the country of the country, the region, their practices, everything. This is respect. If students are not validated, recognized, or appreciated, students are very likely to be isolated. This is normal. Just imagine I'm part of a world that nobody in this classroom is willing to know anything about me, how I'm going to feel. Isolated. And I would not be willing to interact with others. And this is a very big part of our education, to support each other emotionally, to be there for each other emotionally. Because we don't want students to graduate from our schools with all those specialized knowledge and low self-esteem. We want people who can speak up in any moment, those who have courage, those who have learned that they're worth it. And this will be a great part of our schooling. With that, I will pass to Khater from all the way to Iran.
Well, I want to start my talk with a very simple question of what time is it in your hometown at the moment? Here in my hometown, Tehran, the capital of Iran, Asia, Middle country, time is about 12 p.m. Friday, and everyone is supposed to be at work on Saturday, which is actually the first day of the week. When it comes to the limitations and challenges that online learning poses to international students all around the world, it would be a great idea to talk about asynchronous and synchronous classes at the same time, while staying motivated for 30 weeks of an academic semester in an asynchronous sessions require a lot of a significant amount of effort and self-regulation. Actually, synchronous classes have their own limitations as well. Time differences can be a major problem for international students during synchronous sessions, and it can affect their performance during the classes and actually their personal lifestyle in many ways. Staying up late to 4 a.m. to attend my synchronous classes at St. John's, Newfoundland for about a year transformed me from an early bird into a late night owl. It changes my lifestyle in many aspects. I also had to shift my work time as a teacher. From technical perspective, there are also some challenges and limitations for online international students related to technical and technological issues. For example, frequent power outage, unstable or slow internet connection, filtering system in some countries that block certain online platforms like WebEx or Brightspace, and force students to use web filters, VPNs, and proxies, which make their connection even slower. As an international student, I usually use the online platforms. I always have connection issues during synchronous classes. And I remember that once I was fully prepared for my final project in a course, and as since I anticipated having technological problem through WebEx and during my presentation, I prefer to choose the medium of silence to present my final project in the course of decolonizing pedagogy, to overcome my personal problem, actually, which I have to confess that it was truly one of the most difficult tasks I've ever done. In addition to that, students who attend face-to-face classes and have the opportunity to use campus computers and campus facilities or related device in time of troubles. However, for remote learners, especially international students, the possibility of such equal opportunity has shrunk, and that is exactly where the diversity of socioeconomic status of international students can also affect their educational performance in online courses. And since exhibiting care and building connectedness, as Anasha Oiso and Kay Blankson asserts, play a fundamental principal role in education, educators must devote more attention to reducing this gap, actually. This reduction could happen through many ways, like regular check of students' presence by, instructor to assure them that their attendance, despite all the technological problems, are valued. Well, showing concern and empathy. Well, talking about limitations and challenges, I feel that urge to talk about the solution and new horizons as well. As an international student studying from my hometown online, I do believe that communication is the key to many of these problems, actually. It is important to check in on your student as often as possible by posting in detail clear instructions, providing frequent feedbacks or even smaller greetings to know how they progress. And it is also important to reach out to professor as often as possible and talk and write to them about your challenges, concern, and limitations. I have to say that don't be afraid to openly talk to your professor about your concern or suggestions, because most of the time they may be open to hearing them. Here I should thank my professor, my own professor, my group members, and also the University of Windsor, which provide this platform for us to, talk about our concerns as international students.
Thank you, Khetere. And we'll come back to these questions, I guess, at the end when we have the general discussion. Yeah, thank you.
I guess Macmillan, Jill Macmillan from the University of Saskatchewan is not here.
No, I am.
Oh, you are? Sorry. I'm sorry.
That's fine. I'm just going to upload my slides.
Oh, yeah, sure. You can go ahead, please.
A few seconds. But thanks for the amazing presentation. I see a lot of overlap where some of the ideas that you've shared will certainly be revisited a little bit in my presentation. So I'm just waiting for those slides to appear. Does everyone see the slides?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for, again, those preceding presentations. I am speaking today from the traditional homeland of Treaty 6 people and the Métis. And my focus today is on supporting international graduate students, specifically drawing on my experience teaching a fall 2020 non-credit course. So for a bit of context, this course has been around in a couple of different iterations, and it's entitled Academic Preparation for International Graduate Students, and it is hosted at the University of Saskatchewan. This university, it's a mid-sized university, I would suggest, about 17,000 undergrads and more than 3,000 graduate students, a large proportion of which are international students. The course is non-credit and it's open to both MA and PhD students across all disciplines. So it really is welcoming to any student who's interested in taking it. It is 9 weeks in length and it is structured as a pass or fail course, and it appears on one's transcript. So the origin of this course was very much informed by the challenges that graduate students face, but specifically international graduate students might face when adjusting to their new program. So graduate students themselves face a lot of transition challenges. So this could be due to academic expectations, the challenges of managing time and more complex projects, and if a thesis or a dissertation student, managing that student-supervisor relationship, which can often be a point of stress and anxiety. But these stresses can be compounded by the international experience. So there might be some of those academic differences or gaps that have been discussed in some of the previous presentations today. So some of those different expectations in terms of behavior or teaching in the classroom, as well as assessment norms. There are larger cultural adjustments that might take place. There can be feelings of isolation or alienation. And depending on one's previous language background, there might be some language limitations or communication challenges. So that was sort of the inspiration for this course. And the course is constructed around these 4 learning outcomes. So the first is all about developing a stronger understanding of cultural norms within a Canadian university environment and how these norms can influence the graduate student experience. Secondly, increasing understanding of academic integrity from a theoretical as well as a practical lens. So just seeing that difference between the intentional versus unintentional plagiarism that was discussed earlier. And then there's that continued skills focus, looking at how to enhance research, critical thinking, and communication skills. And lastly, developing an awareness of different campus supports and services. So this was all well and good. Then COVID happened and we had to shift to a remote delivery. And I will admit I was a little bit nervous. I had never taught in an online context before, though I had experience as an online learner. So as I needed to adjust my course, I was thinking, well, will the cohort model be compromised? Because so much of the purpose of this course was helping students to connect with their peers and make those social connections. I was wondering if students were going to engage meaningfully with the materials. So how could I, check to make sure they had done the readings, for instance? And lastly, at the end of the day, would students feel that the course was actually worth their time? Because I don't want them to feel that they wasted 9 weeks of their life on this course. So my approach or my solution was to really reflect on the essentials from the in-person course, reflecting on student feedback that I'd received previously from the in-person course, as well as survey data that I collected at the very beginning of the new online offering, as well as reflect on some of the personal experience I had as an online learner. So when thinking about all the different learning opportunities I had taken advantage of online, it sort of started to cluster around this notion of humanized online learning and this notion of the pedagogy of care, which was first conceptualized in the 1980s by Nell Noddings. And so my interpretation of pedagogy of care in an online environment was thinking about flexibility, sharing, and empathy. And so in terms of how this influenced the course, I really thought about the design and assessment in different ways, as well as ensuring that course materials were going to be open access and easily accessible. So I had optional videos, for instance, but I made text the bigger part of the course, again, thinking about some of those bandwidth issues and connectivity issues. So I was thinking about, okay, well, what do students want from this course? Really trying to drill down to ensure that I was delivering what they wanted from the course. And based on previous feedback, as well as more recent survey data, students were really attracted to the multifaceted nature of the course. And this was very much in line with the stated learning outcomes, which was good. So I knew that as long as I was fulfilling those learning outcomes, most students should be pretty satisfied. I was also reflecting, as noted previously, on my personal experiences with online learning. And when I thought about the courses I liked the most, it was that sense of connectedness, responsiveness, so people really interacting as much as possible, as opposed to what could seem like just sort of an online textbook. I wanted that degree of interaction. And so I was thinking about, well, how do I make this very clean and organized? How do I make it very accessible from a user design experience and a user experience perspective? And I was also very aware and cognizant of time zone realities. When I surveyed students, approximately 50% were still studying outside of Canada, so I knew that synchronous was off the table. I just didn't think it was going to be fair, so I did opt for an asynchronous approach, though I did have virtual office hours and a policy of students can contact me to set up individual appointments at their convenience. So in terms of that overall design, I thought about that visual place. So we use Canvas at the University of Saskatchewan. And so I made use of that landing page to really try and establish what I hoped would be a welcoming space. So I had a short video that students could click on it if they wanted to, but they wouldn't lose out because the takeaway information was also captured in text below, which was providing that sense of the overview of the course structure. And of course, this was supplemented via a more detailed syllabus that was also provided. I also wanted to make myself as visible as possible, and this required getting over some shyness and reluctance to put my face out there. But I just had to put that ego aside. I made short videos on a weekly basis to introduce the course content for the week, focusing on some of the themes, some of the stuff that was happening in Saskatoon and Canada, in order to provide sort of that friendly face, shall we say. And it was also really key that the discussion forums, everyone would have comments on every post that they made. Fortunately, I had a TA who was assisting me, but we had 44 students in the course. They had to post every week fairly substantially, and we ensured that every single comment was responded to because that was something that I always valued when I was an online student. So it was a lot of work, but I think it was very important to do. And then there was just this sort of social corner as well. So I would take photos of what was going on in the area. And I also, for the students who were in Canada, just letting them know about the realities of winter weather in Saskatoon. We reached a record low of minus 42.6 degrees Celsius. We broke the record this winter. So I just needed people to be cognizant of that. Because most of the students were still expecting to come to Canada, and some were already in Canada. One of the things I did appreciate about the online course was a flexibility for reimagining the structure of information. And this was also part of that philosophy of flexibility. So I really wanted to ensure that, yes, there was a mandatory component, but then there was additional information that students could engage with as their interest or time allowed. So the main focus was that first theme, all about the transition to graduate school. And this was where the concentration of the course centered. But then we had weekly information about different writing strategies with some optional discussion. And then another area around Canadian culture with some optional discussion, and then that social corner. So just for a little bit of detail, some of those themes within that, that first area of concentration, we'd consider everything from about planning for success, research and reading strategies, academic integrity in the writing process, relationships and community, traditional ways of knowing. And I would supplement my framing of these topics with some storytelling because I would share my experiences of graduate school in Canada, both good and bad, some of the very awkward conversations I had to have as a student. I also spoke about some of my experiences in my professional life in a Canadian as well as an international context. I would also draw on my experiences of being a Canadian who has lived in different parts of Canada and who has also lived in different cultural contexts overseas. So I was able to pull in these different elements to try and establish that sense of connection with students and frame it in a more accessible way. The assessments were as follows. So we had a lot of focus on the mandatory weekly discussion all around that transition. And this was informed by reflections on different readings and people drawing on their personal experiences. And I provided optional prompts, but I always framed them as optional. So if someone was sort of struggling to think about what to post that week, they could just go and answer some of those questions. We also had a series of academic integrity quizzes. We had a short annotated bibliography assignment that fed into a mini literature review assessment. But if students had already published in an English language journal, I offered a challenge for credit option because my perspective is if someone was a PhD student and they already had a publication record in English journals, then they wouldn't necessarily benefit from doing this assessment. So they could decide whether or not to do it. And then we concluded the class with a reflection, and students were given the option of either producing a video or producing a piece of writing. Notably, everyone chose the writing option. And I was very moved by what a lot of people wrote about the course and what they were planning to take away from the course. In terms of the student engagement with the course, I did survey students at the end. Not all students responded, unfortunately, so this is quite limited data. So 20 students out of 44 completed the end of course survey, so less than 50%. But those who did complete it all reported very positive experiences, and I have the breakdown there. And I just wanted to share some of the sample student feedback in case you might be at an institution who's thinking about the value of this sort of course. As noted, as an international student, I didn't know much about the Canadian education system, like what I can expect and what the university might be expecting from me regarding academics. This course has helped me prepare academically. Second, being an international student and living in another country sometimes made me feel a little disconnected. This discipline was a great opportunity to connect me with the USAS community and help me discover skills to deal with challenges. And then commenting on the fact that we did comment on every single discussion post and the positive feelings that developed. And then the sort of down-to-earth comment, which I really appreciated because that's how I am in my teaching. I try and think of things from very pragmatic perspective. So that was one of my favorite pieces of feedback, frankly. So in terms of just general lessons learned, I'm not a complete convert to online teaching, but I did find some surprising benefits to it that are going to inform my practice going forward. So I saw that there was potential for greater peer-to-peer learning. In a conventional classroom setting, you'll have dominant speakers, and even if you are breaking people into small groups, you're usually learning from a fairly limited number of students, where the discussion posts and forums meant that people had the opportunity to really hear from a greater number of their peers. So whether or not people actually took advantage of that is a little bit uncertain, but that was a possibility that was afforded in that context as opposed to in person. The course also attracted and accommodated a greater number of students. I had 44 students in fall 2020 compared to 32 in fall 2019, which is a pretty large increase proportionately. And so my own assumptions or theories about this increase of enrollment and retention is that it might have stemmed from very unique situation of the pandemic where people want that sense of connection, or it might be because it was just easier to schedule an asynchronous course around their other obligations. So it's something I'm still thinking about. And what was also interesting was that students asked that they were able to continue to access the course beyond its initial end date because they wanted to keep looking at some of those readings and discussion posts. And so the course became this resource that I didn't expect it would become. So they said, you know, I didn't have time to look at all of the optional modules, for instance, during the actual term, but during the winter break, I'd love to go back and look again at some of those readings. And so I was able to just keep the course open by an additional, I think, month and a half. I'm going to continue to revisit course design. I'm teaching this again as an online only course in the fall. I am always trying to figure out when is more actually more. So I'm wondering, do I have too many readings? Do I have too much emphasis on discussion? So I am still trying to find that bit of balance. And I'm quite excited in the fall, depending on what's happening with COVID. I'm planning to pilot a hybrid version of the course in the winter. So we're going to reduce the amount of time in person in order to keep the really great elements of the online course into practice. And so I'm using this philosophy, keep what worked going forward. So thank you so much. If you'd like to get in contact, that's my email. And these are just some of the recommended readings that informed some of today's presentation. So yeah, I haven't seen anything in the chat because I was focused on the slides, but I'll mute myself for now and catch up. And I'll also stop sharing the slides as well.
Thank you so much for your great presentation. I can't tell how much I enjoyed this session. Charissa, you have a question from someone that, is the higher rates of plagiarism amongst international students based on self-reporting or number of those who were caught? You had
Yeah,
this
that's
question.
a good question. And I didn't see the chat either until after the presentation was over. And there were so many, I was like, ah. But basically what I saw was it was based on the number that were reported by the universities. So it wasn't self-reported because, again, a lot of these students don't even realize what they're doing. So I read in a study or two where the students actually, after they were taught, hey, this is acceptable, this isn't, this is what we consider dishonest behavior, and this is what we would consider okay in these Western University contexts. And then the students would be able to self-identify after that and say, oh, I've been doing it like this. I didn't realize I wasn't supposed to be doing that. And so then they would self-identify, but it wasn't self-identified in almost, I don't think any of the studies I looked at, it was always based on the institutions reporting it. So that was a good point that someone brought up in the chat.
Yep. And also, Jan, can you share anything from your side?
I'll just turn it over to the graduate students, but I do want to flag the number of times I heard the word relationships and the importance of relationships. I teach with the responsive classroom philosophy that I heard Jill alluding to, that she thinks about her personal experiences as a learner. And I think when we do that, we bring to light some things that we found that made us uncomfortable that can then help to affirm and celebrate the voices that we're working with. I love the pedagogy of care that you cited, Jill. Really lovely there. So anything, Hussein, that you wanted to say?
I'm not sure if you want me to read the questions or.
What do you think, Jaya?
If there are any questions in the chat, it's better to answer them first and then have a clue. Yep.
Okay. I will. Do you want me to copy them in the chat box?
Not really, but it's okay that you can share something. I'll be here to ask you the question if anyone types here.
Okay.
I just want anyone to share about the interactive learning and the importance of interactive learning. I want to hear so.
You got anything to offer there?
Pardon. Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. Hello.
I
Lord.
teach graduate. Yes.
Yeah,
I
you
teach
can.
graduate students in a collaborative program, actually. So I'm very interested in this, and I'm just wondering. My own thing about collaboration is it takes a lot of work, but it is great for developing interpersonal skills. It does. I think the issue with adults is that adults find it very difficult to become interdependent. Especially in the West, we're very big on independence, and collaboration is interdependence. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, especially working with people from other cultures. So I think that's one of the things that a teacher has to learn to work with, is developing, helping students to become interdependent in a socially helpful way.
That's great. So we also have a question here from Jan that how did you make posting comments safe for people who struggle with writing in a language that is not their first language? So I want anyone to talk on this. This question was for.
I think it was for Jill.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's for Jill, I guess.
How did you
Sorry, I've
help?
been a bit distracted trying to respond to the comments in the chat. And so I did note, my educational background is that I was a high school teacher for a number of years. That's where I had my international experience. I lived and taught in Costa Rica and Singapore. So I've had that cultural adjustment myself, albeit from a very privileged position of being a white English speaker. And so in those contexts, I knew that you don't have to grade every single piece of work from the same perspective. So with the discussions, it really was a judgment-free zone in terms of how people were constructing their thoughts, did not mark at all for grammar or spelling in that context, because I just wanted to be a conversation. The expectations were they had to be a certain length. And so that could be a challenge for some students, but it was to get them engaging with the readings and their own experiences in order to start anticipating how they could draw on previous successes in order to overcome any challenges that they might encounter. Because one of the messages I like to really reiterate to graduate students, and this is whether they are an international student or not, because often graduate students are facing a lot of challenges regardless of their point of origin, that they have had previous success. Otherwise, they would not be admitted into a program, they would not be in university. And so, yes, they might be in a very difficult or challenging position at that moment of time, but they can think back on when they've overcome different challenges and what they learned from overcoming those challenges. And I'll share my own experiences of receiving really terrible feedback, for instance. I've received that. And I always say, at the time I was mortified. I was really, really mortified because I was someone who was used to always receiving positive feedback. I was quiet, I did my work, I achieved a certain number of grades, but in a professional context after undergrad, I received my first sort of professional evaluation, and there were some negatives in there, and it really threw me. But I've always learned from that as a result. And so I'll share those sort of uncomfortable experiences in order to try and model that vulnerability and that sharing, but also within parameters where people feel comfortable sharing that. And I'm not going to press people to say, share all of the terrible things that you've ever experienced with the class. That's not realistic. Sorry, I've been rambling a little bit, so I'll mute. I think I went away from the initial question.
Okay, so I pass on this time to Sylvia. You have raised your hand, right?
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
So I have one comment and two questions, and I'll try to be as brief as possible. The first one is a thank you to the group that talked about positive online learning. I was taking notes as everybody was speaking, and the thing that I really connected to was when you were talking about validation. I believe it was Sen, you were talking about that. I just wanted to thank you because I teach a communication course for civil engineers, and that can be a challenging experience. And every time I have that, so they go from hard sciences to me. Now you have to talk to people, and we're moving around and all of that. So it would really help me to justify why I'm making do that. Because I find that if I don't tell them why they're doing something, that they don't do it, or they complain. So that's one thing. And then I have a quick question for Jill and one for Teresa. So Jill, I'm from the University of Alberta. We teach a similar course, but it's with the Center for Writers, so the Writing Center. And it doesn't really show on the transcripts, and it has a slightly different focus. I was wondering if students were able to use that for professional development. So your course, because that's how our students can use that course for professional development. So they will be able to fulfill the requirement that way. And then for Charissa, one quick question about unintentional plagiarism, and that can be a question for the room. So you were talking about unintentional plagiarism as being considered, but at the University of Alberta, it's not a thing. So they actually say there isn't such a thing as an unintentional plagiarism because you always know you're doing it. So I'm wondering what other institutions think about that and how they approach it. Thank you. Sorry for the rant.
We also have Matt Rahamian, like they have also raised their hand. So are you here, Matt?
Hi, yes, thank you, Jaya Sandip. Yeah, I appreciate all the sessions and I specifically like that. And this is like a comment, and if you have anything more for me, please feel free to share. I'll take note of that. And the good thing is that the recording would be available, fingers crossed, online, so I can refer back to that. The concept of education as a professional in the post-enlightenment movement of industrial revolution, your job is to teach. Don't worry about their mental well-being. Don't worry about other aspects of that. Go teach. Leave those things to the other folks at wellness center, at the counseling services, etc. But as educators, we are dealing with human subjects, not with tools in a factory. And those human subjects, there is a rumor that they have emotions. There is another rumor that they have social needs, and we need to take care of that, right? So I really appreciate what you folks shared about that, like the last two presentations. The first one about unintentional or incidental plagiarism by international students. We are still to find some solid evidence to support that. In educational psychology, there is, and in psychology in general, there is a concept called confirmation bias. So we look for something and then we find it. In old historical times, they used to say, you ask and you shall receive. So that's something to consider. And I'm telling you as part of the ACO, Academic Integrity Council of Ontario. So we are constantly researching these subjects. Nobody's talking about Felicia Hoffman 2 years ago. She went to prison. She was sentenced to prison for trying to bribe her kids into the college system. Nobody talks about the research that found a lot of potential faculty candidates in the United States claimed subjects and papers in their CVs that were never published. So now I'm wondering how some of those people made it to the faculty level. How are they going to be good judges of who is plagiarizing more or less? That's another thing that and if there is anything that could help that conversation moving forward, we would be more than happy to help. That being said, after the pandemic, at least in Canada that I know of, like the academic integrity groups in Canada, there has been a high rise in cheating and plagiarism, and not just international. It's inclusive. One of the things that was inclusive was this one, sadly. So if there is anything on that area, I would be more than happy to hear that. Thanks.
You can go ahead, Hussein.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention something that I jotted down about Carisa's presentation, which was very helpful to realize that why there are some, let's say, unintentional plagiarism, that I've been thinking about this all the time, that why international students are prone to this and why this happened. Well, the very first thing is that, well, plagiarism in a written form, I would say that probably is very visible, but plagiarism in our thinking probably is not visible. So there are many parts of the world that they will ask us to just think exactly as many other people think. That is a predetermined decision, the predetermined thinking that I have to go through that. So, well, it's very difficult for people who have been trained and hardwired in these types of communities to think independently. Well, this was well, all of the presentations were perfect. It was really a great learning experience for me today. But I think that, well, proudly international students need to learn, or we need to teach, not to teach them, not to give them a space to critically think, to think critically, because it's when people plagiarize. Well, I have students calling from my country and they will ask me, what are the courses like? I say, you can choose your own. And they say, no, I don't want to choose my own. I want them to tell me what to do, because they have been learning this for over 25 years or so, and it's really very difficult. They don't feel very safe because their thoughts have never been appreciated. I think when we just ask them to think independently, they probably would and appreciate their thoughts. Everybody can think critically, and that was something I really wanted to add to this, and there were great ideas about how to address that, and thank you.
And I'll just go ahead and say a few things there. So I think that's super important what Hussein just brought up, because it goes back to what Jill was saying, and also the second group, Jan's group, about just having that appreciation for people's thoughts and where they're coming from and speaking. And maybe if that shift can happen, then they will feel more confident to maybe put their own thoughts, instead of feeling like they have to put in this box and they're not sure exactly what that box looks like. And they want someone to put it in that box for them, or at least point them to something very specifically. So that's an excellent point. And I think that's really just, it kind of sums it all up, and it kind of connects all three of the presentations together, I think, is appreciation for where people are coming from, and also being able to let them build that vulnerability and feel safe. Now back to Sylvia, your question, I'm not 100% sure, because again, I looked at about 20 studies or so, and they didn't make it clear on university standings of what they considered. But what my kind of feeling is, maybe other people know more than I do, is that it seems like once someone is caught, then obviously, there's an academic process for that, and there's no such thing as, well, was this unintended or intended? Usually there's a process, but maybe a professor could then work with that student and say, well, do you know why you were caught? Do you know what this means? Or instead of caught, do you know why we're doing this? Do you understand what this is? And then maybe have that conversation, which is probably what is being done informally and isn't reported a lot, by these universities. But what is reported, at least in the US and in Canada, it seems like, is when these things happen and having a record of that. Now, back to what Matt was saying, which is it just confirmation bias? Because we've seen this, it's more popular now. Now we're on the lookout for them more than ever before, and it's becoming more popular. I don't know, maybe so. I'm sure that's the case of many things that you guys could give examples for over time, where, maybe it happened a lot before, but because no one was talking about it, it wasn't really mentioned, it really wasn't recorded, it really wasn't brought up as much. But now that it's out there and people are thinking about it and talking about it and having that discussion more, it's like everywhere you look now. And there's such a growing body of studies that are now on this in the past 10 years, where if you look 30 years ago, you don't have hardly any studies on it. So maybe Matt has a good point there, that when it's out there more, it's going to be more popular, more frequent. You're going to see it more, you're going to report it more. And so it's on the minds maybe of the people who are running institutions more. And I'm trying to think what else. Is there anything else? I think the last thing was that someone brought up in the chat box, and I think either Matt or Hussein, I don't know which one of you guys said it, but it's more visible, I think, in writing. You're right, because it's more evident. You can kind of catch it a little bit easier than if someone's just, like you said, speaking. But when it's someone turning in an assignment and you say, oh, this doesn't sound like them, and any teacher knows what I'm talking about, and you kind of look a little closer, this really doesn't sound like them. And it's easier to catch it because maybe, again, they're working with their second or third or fourth language. So it's not going to be quite as natural sounding. So just some thoughts, but again, I don't have the answers, and this is something that I just scratched the surface of, and there's so much more. And I think that it starts with conversations. There you go. But thank you guys for those comments. I appreciate them.
Jill, do you want to share something?
I have probably a dozen things that I could talk about just based on listening to everyone, but this is such a fantastic conversation. I wanted to make sure that the question that was posed earlier doesn't go unanswered. So I think it was about how students access this course. So it's a pass-fail course, as I noted, and it does appear on the transcript. So it's sort of this strange entity because it's completely optional, it's pass-fail, but there is an official record of that on the transcript. So that is the, I guess, the incentive to make sure that you are fulfilling all of the components. It is funded through the College of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies rather than the Teaching and Learning Center, but it's administered through the library, which is where I'm positioned within Student Learning Services. So the good thing about that structure, I think, is that it's forcing collaborations and encouraging connections with librarians, for instance. So I often draw on my library colleagues in order to provide some of that research support. So hopefully that's answered that earlier question. But I just wanted to go back briefly to some of the conversations around meeting people where they are and how this relates to international students. I see so many parallels between that philosophy and what we really should just be doing as a default, because when you think of a first generation experience, I was effectively a first gen student. So there was a lot of that hidden curriculum that I had no awareness of when I started university as an undergrad. And then that journey was sort of complicated further when I was a graduate student. So it's been a little bit interesting, some of the feedback that I've received from students or even staff or faculty on campus when they hear about the course that I teach, and some of them have said to me, shouldn't that be a course that every graduate student takes, or that should be available to all graduate students, in terms of just having this space where you can talk about, what some of the expectations are that aren't necessarily spelled out so explicitly to students.
So we are into the end of this session. I can't tell how much I enjoyed this session. Thank you everyone for joining us. And at the end, I just want to give a big round of applause to all the presenters. Really, thank you so much. You have really shared a lots of useful information, which will help us grow more.
Thanks for your work, Jaya, in keeping us all together. It was really fabulous facilitation, and you guided the discussion beautifully. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you. So have a great day.
Come and visit us in Newfoundland. Come visit us in Newfoundland.
Sure. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.